Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the We Are the Caretakers team showcasing We Are the Caretakers. We Are the Caretakers is an afrofuturist sci-fi squad management RPG and RTS. It is currently in a public beta that you can play through now as part of the Steam Games Festival. And I am joined today by the creative director of the game, Scott Brodie.
Hello.
As well as a fascinating and fantastic designer on the game, Sherveen.
Hey there.
And we're going to be playing through some of the stuff that you can currently see in the beta today, talking about where the project came from, where it's going, and how you can experience it going into the future. And for that, we're just going to jump directly into gameplay.
All right, so we're in the. I've just started the prologue. If you want to talk about that a bit and maybe the high-level concept.
Yes.
Bobby, you have anything to say, or I can talk about like mission stuff as well?
Yeah. Why don't you talk about the mission stuff that went into this prologue?
Sure. Yeah. I think this prologue has seen a lot of iterations. Probably the mission that we've tweaked the most. Tutorials are always really complicated because you're distilling a lot of the stuff that everyone needs to know to get through a mission. Versus
you're also in the odd position for a game that's intended to be open-ended and systemic, like We Are the Caretakers, deeply replayable. You have to convey some of that sense of freedom while in the tutorial, where you're teaching people how to click on things.
Yeah, so a lot of it is figuring out what is like fun to know, but isn't the like most pressing information. And so the big things for this is moving a unit, simple things. I wanted to make sure that, even if you're maybe new to RTSs or you haven't played them in a while, it's still easy to pick it up and play. It starts with you having to go and investigate a wounded Ron. So have like scenario that's laid out for you. You're Ron, and it's highlighting a lot of the basic systems, capturing towns, interacting with poachers, encounters, and stuff like that. And it actually started off a lot more open-ended, a lot more paths. We focused and narrowed it down a lot more because we were finding that it was kind of fine to let players have a more linear prologue mission, even though the game is a lot more open-ended, since you're getting more missions very quickly after it. And we weren't super worried about players thinking that the game was going to be linear based on the gameplay that's in there.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things in terms of streamlining was how narrative was sort of not and then became a larger part of it. So I think it'd be interesting to hear Xalavier just talk about kind of like the many kind of approaches that we took and eventually kind of where we landed.
Oh, I didn't introduce myself. Hi, I'm Xalavier Nelson Jr. I'm narrative lead on the project. The story of We Are the Caretakers in general has evolved a lot over time, especially the way that it's delivered. This is my first time working on an RTS, for example, and having a good balance of providing context for an adventure, then getting out of your way so that you can actually do things within the game world, as we can even see within this prologue, takes a lot of iteration and structure and time. So coming into this prologue, I knew the most important things to establish was the player's role of leadership, a sort of I don't want to use the term Optimus Prime, but we do have this vision of Optimus Prime as a leader who, with this sense of both rigid justice and of fairness, someone who the people who work with them care about and respect to a deep level. So we want to establish your voice in the world very quickly, because you are a named character with a role, the conductor of the caretakers. And we also want to establish a mystery that would for the first era and going forward, the first major section of the game, the first act, if you will, we wanted to establish a mystery that would carry you into the rest of the experience as quickly as possible. Finding what the mystery was, what were the pieces intended to convey it, what those pieces meant. Sometimes we would have a piece of mystery that we established in the intro or later on, and we'd completely change. We'd use the exact same imagery or asset and then completely change what it meant to reach the version that we have now, which I'm really proud of. I think we pulled off something really special here. If you're now looking at sort of the Circle of Ron, that sequence alone is now years in the making, and seeing it actually exist and what it says about the shenanigans you're about to find yourself in with potentially cosmic consequences is very exciting.
Absolutely, and it was really cool to see how some of these things moved from like either being a cutscene or a gameplay element, and how those things have been pushed around to, you know, either becoming a part of the map or not, was interesting. So I think we found a good balance with this sort of intro run scene, you know, where we're able to establish these creatures that you care about, but do it in a way where you're not having to like do a lot of the high level interactions that you'll be doing later in later missions. And also the decision I think has worked out the best is the decision to actually make Akachi the baby Ron that we're seeing right now, that has kind of joined the Caretakers, to actually make them a part of your party and a playable character. So yeah, I think all around it's been really, really fun seeing your evolution of the story and seeing our overall evolution of how those kind of world building elements all fit together.
And just to pull back the curtain a little bit, is there something you were going to say?
I was just going to say, for your understanding, I just finished the first mission and have just stopped into HQ, so I'll pause on a lot of movement to the next mission until we get there. But yeah, continue, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is a great place to talk about how even small design changes can radically affect development. Pull back the curtain a little bit. So Akachi, as you just saw, was added to the party in the last mission. Duquesne was told off and basically ejected from the Caretakers, if I remember the mission correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And you're in this HQ. And the thing is, in the HQ, you can choose who goes into your squad. And if you have a character that is fundamental to the story and to your character's personal development, the conductor, now that you've got Akachi, structuring the game such that Akachi can be added to your party mid-mission, or that his presence carries over into future missions, just that one small, something we call a bespoke or unique change, can cause a whole lot of work to make it happen, something that seems seamless, because we've seen it even in other games. Speaking of things that we've seen in other games that have unique consequences and unique spins and exciting pieces in We Are the Caretakers, we've got this HQ, which is the first major part of our game flow. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. So we tried to come up with a fun sort of place to prepare your squads and to give you some interesting choices that some are familiar with things you might see in XCOM or Darkest Dungeon, but a few others that kind of match our thematic sort of differences. So one of the things you're seeing right now is that we have, in addition to sort of the team building and squad building systems, we have what's called the Atrium, where you'll receive a whole bunch of kind of random recruits that appear and will be based upon the various factions in the world you've met, as well as your reputation, based upon, reputation is built based upon the actions you take in encounters, which we'll talk about in a minute. The other thing that we try to establish is that you aren't leaving the conflict or the people you encounter behind when you leave a mission. They can come back and you kind of have to work out the long-term strategy with that. So one of the things we've done is some of the poachers you detain actually appear as visitors, and you can decide kind of if you want to release them, if you want to reform them potentially, and try to bring them on and to help your cause, and so forth. And in the beta that we have on Steam right now, we just have a few basic examples of that, but long term we plan to have a lot of interesting visitors appear that will have a lot of consequences for how the caretakers will be received. The other piece of this is the technology tree. It's not all that different from your typical kind of grand strategy game, but a lot of the game ends up being about the long-term progression and survival versus having a ton of excitement in any particular mission. And one of the ways that we kind of one of the ways you can shape how your sort of group of caretakers differ or will have different ways to approach different types of missions will be these different technologies. And there's generally categories of ways to help your characters, ways to affect the world, so things like making towns become healing hubs, or just increasing your capacity to do more. So increasing the number of units you have, the number of supplies you have, even opening up a shop eventually in the HQ and so forth. So yeah, lots of fun sort of meta and progression systems to play with.
Speaking of, you mentioned that this is an element pulled from Grand Strategy. We the Caretakers also has these action elements. A lot of genre fusion stuff happening. Can you talk a little bit about how that, how we're going to see the consequences of your actions here go into the other action-oriented layers of the game, and how this genre fusion came to be?
Yeah, so one of the things you may be leading me to is one of my core inspirations for these systems was an older strategy game called Ogre Battle, March of the Black Queen. So this is something I was obsessed with, and one of the things that they do really well in that game is blend a lot of different genres into kind of a cohesive whole. So I definitely think in terms of inspirations, that game is worth a look, and hopefully I'll be able to talk about that more in the Discord and so forth. But in terms of how they fit together in our game, the way you'll see a lot of these consequences play out is, like I mentioned, that reputation system. So you'll have consequences in the HQ where you can see right now on the stream we've opened up a story mission, and there's just choices here where you can decide what's kind of most important to you. Those choices will manifest in your interactions with people in towns and just people of the areas you're going to protect. So you may or may not be able to recruit a character. They may or may not give you information on the whereabouts of a poacher, and they may block off your access to parts of the map. And then lastly, and maybe it'd be best if I start to jump into the next barrier breakdown mission to show this, but it'll manifest in encounters. You'll start to see that based upon your reputation and your sort of individual actions to be more aggressive or diplomatic, you'll start to see the behavior of your the other parties change. So they might run away from you if you're being extra threatening, or they may be more friendly. They may be easier to finish and detain, etc. So I'm going to jump into barrier breakdown right now, and maybe this might be a good point for Sherveen to talk about how this mission came together.
Yeah, so the second field mission is what I like to call them, I guess, is barrier breakdown. And this is a mission where a poacher boss has stolen some of your Shadran technology and walled themselves into this little improvised fortress that you are trying to break down and get to. So one of the cool things I do want to mention, if we haven't already, is that we are a procedurally generated game. So these maps are different each time you play them. It's actually, as a small team, doing procedural generation is very tricky because you can spend like, you could, some teams have like an entire person who just works on that. So we're doing a really fun mix that lets us do that, where we have some things that are procedurally generated, some things are more authored to let us make the maps look and feel better. And we're also kind of using seeds to give us some shortcuts to get to interesting maps faster. Scott is going to have to send his units to some batteries that are in this map and dismantle them. While he's doing that, the batteries have some guards patrolling them that he could run into. And if he manages to sneak past the guards and dismantle the battery, they will be alerted and start chasing one of his units. And I was kind of really inspired by, honestly, this is a relatively straightforward mission structure in a lot of open world games that I've seen, where you're trying to get somewhere and it's basically like keys and gates. So I've seen, you'll see it in open world games, you'll see it in puzzle games, and I just really wanted to try and make an RTS app that was kind of centered around this, because I don't think I've really played too many that feel kind of like this. So that was kind of the starting point for me, and then kind of pushing it. I think it was Scott's idea to add guards and things like that, and it is really a collaborative process, and when you're making some of these missions, and not to compliment Xalavier too much, but a real big help is a lot of the narrative underpinnings with these missions. It allows me as a designer to kind of pull back, where I think if there wasn't any narrative stakes and emotional investment happening with a lot of these missions, I think they would need to be more complex, complicated to be interesting to the player. And I think because we have that grounding with the narrative, it means a lot of these early missions can still be interesting while also being streamlined to an extent and more accessible to new players.
I think speaking in terms of how design guides and significantly assists narrative, outside of obvious areas like how Scott's mission flow, going from the HQ to the fields to encounters with poachers, tying in narrative to meaningfully sort of interact and support that foundation and structure is not just a big old help, but it's also a big part of how the game works. Because if your narrative works with the game, then the entire game works better as a whole. But in the cases of things like this barrier breakdown mission, Sherveen came in with this idea for having a multi-stage mission where you are taking down a barrier, a mini barrier within the central land of Shadra, which is the setting for the game. Well, you might see other locations later on. You're in Shadra, which is within a barrier protected from the outside world, and the Caretakers, which are a international organization in a world where most of the nations have closed in within themselves, or at least are in a unsteady period of peace between each other. They've sealed themselves off. We've got a mini barrier inside of that barrier that these characters are going to get airlifted from in a certain number of days, and you have to take down that small barrier, get back the technology, and most importantly, get back the Ron. So when Sherveen came in with that idea, instead of going like, no, my narrative doesn't support barriers within barriers, I was like, okay, what do these mini barriers mean? How do we make those work within the story? Because on a gameplay level, it's a really interesting context, and it does say some interesting things about the world. How, not to get too metaphorical, but how people continue to try to find ways to seal themselves off for personal gain and how that puts the societies that we're in danger. So yeah, we found a context for these barriers. We found visual ways of communicating what these barriers are, who these characters are, what they want, and how you can diffuse this situation to continue with your own goals of protecting the Ron and protecting the world at large. And that collaboration makes the world so much better. I don't just write a script and people follow it most of the time. What you instead get is a much healthier process of a back and forth as we figure out what's possible, what's best, and how to, on every level of the game, sort of work with each other to support each other's creative decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, looking at comparing We Are the Caretakers to a lot of other projects that I've worked on, I think the biggest success we had was investing in that world building early on, because I think it has informed all the layers of the game and narrative. And I think it's, I think we've said multiple times at, meetings along the way of like how much it seems to pay off to just like have the answers available to us because we did the work early on.
Even if we change the answers later on.
Exactly. Yeah. So like we know generally where we're going, and we see how this change fits in, and either adjust the puzzle or we have the answer present, like you said. So I'm just about to wrap up the boss battle with actually how do we even pronounce this name?
Bacillus.
Bacillus.
Yeah. That's a fantasy name.
It's still beta. Naming is still in beta as well.
They're a sniper now, which is fun for me too. Just never really got to play around with that class too much until recently.
Yeah, so we were just trying to find, what's a unique but simple to understand sort of archetype for a boss, and so we've we're reusing the Shadron classes that are normally a part of the Caretakers, because these are sort of Caretakers gone rogue, or Shadrons gone rogue. And so we've used these sort of guard classes to sort of protect the boss as well as a healer, and then the boss itself has this sort of big shot attack. So you have a choice either to kind of go hard at the boss or take down the support characters. And I think it's it's still an early iteration of it, I think, but I'm pretty happy with it in terms of like adding interest.
Before we go any further, can you talk a little bit about how your decisions in the HQ assembling your team have now moved into this encounter? Because this is an encounter, this is a climactic encounter, and this is one of our action-oriented layers of the game, and it has really interesting genre fusions with auto battlers and with ogre battle that folks might not realize.
Yeah, so I think the beta is just scratching the surface of this, but fundamentally in the HQ, you are looking at your character's abilities. They have a range of sort of aggressive abilities, diplomatic abilities, as well as traits that make them better suited to handle certain types of situations. And so in this particular case, I outfitted my conductor's unit with some additional rangers who are more aggressive, but ended up actually using a more diplomatic approach because the boss itself had a high sort of stamina that could withstand those aggressive attacks, and a lower sort of will, which is the stat you can break down with more diplomatic abilities. So it's a little bit of preparing a unit to be one archetype, but then having multiple units or unit compositions that can deal with different types of situations and characters. Just to like step back a bit, the encounter system is, like you said, an auto battling structure. So you are not directly controlling the actions of the characters. You're setting the strategy for the unit. So you may have seen while the encounter was playing, me changing two sets of buttons. So the first is sort of your stance, which is aggressive, neutral, or diplomatic. That changes the types of abilities your characters will use. And then there's your targeting type, which is which characters will be targeted with those abilities. So in that boss case, I chose the leader targeting type because I wanted to just take out the leader as fast as possible, but leave the other characters alone, because the longer you stay in combat, the more your reputation will go down and the more your threat will increase.
And it's really interesting to see an RTS all about, especially with significant elements of conflict, that's all about ending that conflict as quickly and as kindly as possible. I don't think I've really seen that internal push and pull before.
Yeah, and that's another system that's gone through so many iterations because there aren't that many examples out there of that. And I think we've gone back and forth between, having various stats to represent your will or, your trustworthiness or whatever it might be. But we eventually kind of settled on the system where you have sort of your mental will and you have your physical stamina, and the overall goal or loop of combat is the same. You're trying to wear those stats down, but what you choose to wear down has a significant effect on how sort of the characters and factions in the world feel about your actions and how they ultimately view the caretakers. And so that plays back into the sort of narrative things. One thing you can just see here real quick, and then we can jump back into the next mission, is so our characters actually have different finishing moves. So once you've worn down a character, they then have to use a finisher on them, and different classes have different finishers. And so we happen to use a detain finisher, which is sort of more of the diplomatic styles of finishers, and we were able to detain that boss. So I actually was able to go to the atrium and recruit them, but I took a reputation hit for doing that, for sort of siding with the quote-unquote enemy. So it's kind of fun to say, okay, well, we're going to be, a little bit more progressive and try to reform, but we may take a hit for that in the short term. But I suppose the gameplay benefit is you get to play with different characters, and something that I loved in Ogre Battle and other games is that you can, if you're playing with a certain style, you can, recruit bosses or find special characters that make your caretaker group unique. So I'm
Speaking
gonna
of making our characters unique. I just wanted to take a moment to call out the incredible art direction and work of our art lead, Anthony Jones, who just on every single level knocked it out of the park, from the cute and majestic Ron, hitting that balance, to this range of characters you see here and making them all feel distinct even when we're reusing character models.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting to work with Anthony has been so much fun, and just I feel like I've learned a ton just about art and I guess life too. He's a good mentor in a lot of ways too. But yeah, really you can see his stamp on the game for sure. And if you'd like to follow him specifically, he goes by Robot Pencil, which you can find, in all the social medias.
So the design, we're about to leap into the next sort of mission. Do you want to talk a little bit about the design of the campaign in this beta and how players will see that going forward into the full game?
I'll talk a bit about the campaign, and then Sherveen, I'm jumping into the Protect Ron mission. So once I get through my bit, you feel free to just take it away with that. In terms of the structure of the campaign, Xalavier actually had a really good suggestion early on in the project to kind of structure our campaign in these eras. There were a couple of reasons why we decided to do that, but fundamentally an era is a collection of missions that all share a theme. And what's been nice is that we can end them with these big events and then have different amounts of time pass between the eras. So some eras may just happen one after the other, others might have years pass, things like that, which allow us to do things like change your Ron population numbers, have new major characters be introduced, that type of thing. So I think we've got a fun structure where we can support a lot of different scenarios and not feel too tied in a linear way to what happened in the last era. And I think we found a nice balance of having these bespoke missions within the campaign, as well as these sort of, I don't know what you want to call them, generated or more less narratively tied missions that you can do. And yeah, so far the reception's been pretty good to that.
So Sherveen, do you want to go into how this mission was designed?
Yeah, so this mission, I don't remember the official name. I just think of it as the Protect Ron mission.
Yeah.
But a major focus in our game that is different, I think, from a lot of other RTSs, RPGs, is that it's not necessarily just about defeating the bad guy. The core thing that I think and I come back to is it's about protecting the Ron. So with a lot of the design inspiration, we looked at like anti-poaching pillars, like strategies that rangers use, and a lot of that is like taking poachers and putting them in jail is really the tip of the iceberg there. So a lot of the missions we're trying to like really drive down the point that the Ron are important, and that's what your focus is. And so this is kind of the first mission, I think, where you like properly are explicitly told your objective is to make sure these Rons survive this mission. I believe the current setup is you have a couple towns to visit, so you're in this local area, you're interacting with the local community, seeing how they're doing and how you can impact them to make sure that the Ron are protected. And I think once you've visited all of the towns, it will spawn a poacher that you then defeat. Or if you're exploring around for long enough, I think you can secretly discover the poacher on your own as well. And yeah, I think when I joined onto the project, we had a lot of really good direction for missions in terms of what is a good mission with combat. I think a lot of games have done that really well too, and I think we were executing that well in terms of like finding enemies, finding bosses. And so thankfully, because that was there, I got to like take a step back and ask questions of like, okay, well, what else can an interesting mission be? What does a mission that isn't about combat look like? And that's a lot of the stuff I've been working on, I think, in for future missions beyond the beta. Mm-hmm. But I think that this Protect Ron mission is the closest to that kind of style of mission. More about the pre-steps before you're defeating the poacher. Make sure that this environment is safe for the Ron. It isn't necessarily about just beating that guy.
So what are you looking at right now, Scott?
Yeah, so I'm currently in a encounter with one of the first poachers kind of entering the park. So the mission is structured such that there's these waves, very tower defense in some ways in structure, where we've got these waves of poachers entering the park, and you've got to kind of keep them from getting to the animals. So I've confronted a small group of shattered poachers, but the boss has not yet appeared yet.
Okay, so given this wave structure, Sherveen touched on this a little bit. We've got these mission archetypes, both that we've invented with some pain, as well as mission types and sort of genre structures that we've seen in other things like tower defense. Can you talk a little bit about what these mission archetypes and these influences have meant for the design of a mission and Caretakers? Because I've played a lot of RTSs, but I find myself in We Are The Caretakers not just sticking with the game more, but also having a lot of interactions I do not expect within the setting at all.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So I would say that when I'm approaching a mission, so a lot of the systems design, right, was already a kind of locked in a lot of ways. which is helpful when you're designing a mission, because like, okay, these are my tools, these are my ways that I can go with. So you have like, deploying multiple units, sending them to different places, visiting towns, interacting with poachers, like moving your units to Ron. So those are all the things that we want players to do. And so I'm looking for, okay, what's an interesting way to get the player in the mindset that they're thinking of doing that all on their own. And also, as a kind of second step to that, what are things I can do to make the player know that there's like a better choice to make, but still pick maybe like an irrational, emotional choice? Like, for example, making scenarios where like, oh, my conductor's unit is the best unit, but I want to keep Akachi safe. I'm going to not put them in danger. That's something I'm really interested in with design. So, in approaching a lot of these missions, it's really about structure more than anything. How does the mission change from point A to point B to point C, and how are the dynamics? So, for example, with this Protect Ron mission, its structure, like on a meta level, is actually very similar to Barrier Breakdown, where it's very open in the beginning. There's a lot of things you can do. There's a lot of possibility space. You can send the units to a lot of places, and there's a lot of reason to do that. And then at the end, there's really just one thing you can, which is send the unit to the boss. And that's pretty much identical to the Barrier Breakdown mission. And so when I'm thinking of a mission archetype, I kind of think, okay, well, what does the opposite of that look like? What is a mission that starts out linear and then opens up? That's kind of like the opposite structure. Or what is a mission that has you split your focus between two things at the same time? What does that look like? And it's weird because it's such a meta thing, and because obviously the Protect Ron and the Barrier Breakdown mission are very different in a lot of ways, but I see them very similar in my mind when I'm designing them because of the tension kind of arcs throughout the.
Yeah, did we lose anybody, or is that?
I thought it was just me. I lost Sherveen.
Okay, yeah, you cut off at the very end, so it was unclear. But
I cut off. What? Where,
you got. I think you got through it. Just the very end. Yeah.
Okay.
But in any case, it's actually good timing because the game has been cut off because I beat the boss, and now there is a mysterious ship floating over us here, and we're about to see the sequence you just added. So I don't know. Maybe Xalavier, do you want to talk about the choice to kind of move the conflict to space?
Yes. Early on, actually when I first joined the project, we had a general, we knew that we wanted to have fictional worlds to talk about these real world influences and intersections, things like poaching in real life, wildlife conservation and management, confronting the real world issues of even what does it mean to have an international collaborative justice system in a fictional setting, because that's definitely something I feel qualified to talk about at any given moment. And the very first things I did on the project was to figure out what is this setting that and it sort of inherently captures and touches on all of these different elements. And that led to this really lovely collaboration between everyone involved into Afrofuturism, into what does wildlife conservation mean? What are our ideals as a team, and how does that find itself expressed in a given world? And as we're exploring these sorts of higher level questions, there is also just this fundamental, I found this fundamental root of something I deeply wanted to explore, which was, as the leaders of an organization that can avoid accountability, as as people who are consistently encountering other societies, cultures, governments who themselves are either actively finding ways to avoid accountability or are, through their intentional ignorance, avoiding that responsibility. What is something that forces everyone in a setting involved to basically confront their own biases? Uh, Not just to unite, but to actively become better societies, or in failing to do so, revealing something fundamental about the way that their perspective on the world works. And I remember the moment I wrote this going like, yeah, this isn't going to be acceptable. Aliens. Straight up, something from space is going to rip away all of the foundations of safety in a very literal way, very on the nose way that the societies rely upon. There are different factions and cultures throughout the world, one of which is Shadra, the one which the caretakers are currently based within, and it sealed itself off within a bubble, within a barrier. That barrier, we literally rip it away to expose the characters and the world of the setting to a wider universe. And I remember that's one of the few things actually that you didn't give me notes on, Scott. You're just like, oh, this sounds good. And it was just a Google comment. And like, yeah, it's just been aliens ever since.
What did I miss? What were you expecting the note to be?
I guess I was just expecting you to go like, really? Aliens? Because as I was writing, I was going like, I don't know, aliens. I knew I wanted the barrier to come down, but I thought I'd maybe be like, aliens, really? But and that's one of the reasons that work in this project has been so freeing. It is taking taking quite serious real world issues and crossovers and finding compelling fictional ways to address them. Stuff that holds up internally and externally, but also you wouldn't expect as the first solution for dealing with various things. So going back to one of the missions we just saw, the barrier breakdown, it makes perfect sense that people within a closed-off society would find ways to try to get around that closed-off society. It would involve getting airlifted out, or at least the promise of doing so, and that you'd have to, knock that down. Because come on, man, stop poaching. You're building a literal barrier with it around yourself that you're slowly watching the protectors of these creatures knock down the batteries of one by one. This does not help you. It's hard to it's hard to describe how exciting it is just to have a project where the solution for whether or not something works within its world is whether or not it is effective. So we've got tower defense influences in here. We've got squad management RPG elements in here. We have RTS and grand strategy elements, and a cosmic threat that forces the entire world to confront how important the animals that make up our ecosystems actually are. And all of those things just gel. It's honestly kind of humbling to be a part of.
Yeah, it's been really it has, I'll say it has been 99% fun. There have definitely been some like false starts where it's felt like, man, how are we going to solve this particular thing and make it interesting? And I think perhaps that's why a lot of the, you know, the aliens, which were, I've just actually entered the alien encounter on the stream here. You know, things like aliens, things like high technology and things do help pad some of those moments where we want to maybe spend a little bit more time on something that's not your traditional like gamey fun. But I do think we've really found a way to blend genres in an interesting way that sort of map to the I guess narrative elements we want. So these sort of encounter systems, the HQ system, and the field all sort of support telling this story, whether it's bespoke or procedural, in the way we want. And so I think we still have, you know, lots of work to do until early access, but I'm really pleased with kind of the creative development we've all worked together on to kind of get to this this mashup.
So speaking of this mashup, we're dealing with the actual aliens. Sherveen, can you talk a little bit about how the design of these aliens came together to really deliver this moment of, oh, our world has changed?
So I mean, you know, to go over like how kind of the design responsibilities have been divvied up. So I think Scott's generally been doing a lot of encounters. I've been doing a lot of the missions and maps. But I think there's a lot of trust is, I think, a thing to bring up in terms of a lot of the times when I'm designing a mission, I, in my head, just imagine insert amazing encounter here. And then I just don't think about it. And I'm like, oh, okay, assuming this encounter is amazing, I design the rest of the mission and it'll lead up to this really cool encounter and it will work perfectly. And then like Scott goes in and like works on it and like knocks it out the park. And I think one of the coolest things about designing this mission, I think it's called Finality, it initially was a lot more like climactic, and now I like to think of it almost like a post-climax, where you're kind of stumbling through this wreckage to reach this kind of mountaintop that is this alien encounter. And we talk a lot when we're designing a mission about what the interest is, what is the core interest that the player has when they go into the mission that they want to see fulfilled, like what is that promise? And with this, it really was like mystery and investigation and who are these aliens? So we are like a ton of little tiny elements like making the aliens kind of cloaked and see-through, you know, having that be represented in a number of different ways. You know, not only are their models, their character models, have this cloaking effect on them, that's also true in their character portraits. They don't have names, it's just question marks. And so there's a lot of back and forth between how we do that, both from the field level and the encounter level. And I think, Scott, you could talk specifically to the boss encounter.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of times when I'm just like, you know, I don't like titles, but I've tried to like assume a creative director role on this project because it's the biggest team I've worked with on games to this point. So I try to think.
You want to very quickly sort of bring up some of the names and folks we've worked with?
Yeah, on the team.
Yes.
Yeah. So in addition to Sherveen and Xalavier and Anthony, we have had a ton of amazing collaborators. So early on, we had Sarah Eskandari, who was helping us with sort of early mission design and prototyping of the encounter systems. We have John Para, who you'll be hearing a lot more about around early access, who's done the amazing score for us. We've had Ben Paris, doing environment art. Who else? Stephen Whittle and Elon Gleiber. Oh God, I hope I pronounced his last name right.
I mean, you remembered all the names, which is much more than I did.
Yeah. No, it's like I'm not necessarily struggling. Just like, wow, I'm making sure the team has been so big. I'm making sure I'm not forgetting anyone. But yeah, the last two folks I mentioned did some amazing programming work, and then James Pita, who I've known forever, who has been doing some spot programming, but also has been a really good connection to our topic, like our real world topics, connecting us with some cool research opportunities, among many other things. So yeah, we've had a really I don't know. This is not only the biggest team, but it's been the most fun project to work on, just from all the different people and all the different disciplines kind of coming together on this project. What were we talking about before? The encounters with the alien, right? Yeah. So the main bit about that, I suppose, is thinking about myself as sort of like a creative director, not always being as hands-on as I've been in the past, is like thinking about what are the moments of the game. And this has been one that has kind of stood out from the beginning as something that could be an important and memorable moment in the game. So I've been thinking about what is the look of the alien, how can we change the camera perspective in this encounter, and how do we kind of play up that mystery. But the one thing we haven't really touched on here is sort of how these aliens, which seem seemingly so different from Shadran poachers and things like that, how did they fit into this puzzle of poaching, and why do they care about these animals? And so I love this sort of wild card of sorts kind of coming in and really shaking up this despite our sci-fi presentation and robot suits and all this stuff, it's ultimately the conflict is kind of understandable, and then we kind of throw this in and start to like take it in a different direction. So I was less focused on like the challenge and the balance of this encounter, and more about the moment that it kind of represents, to get you excited to want to go into the rest of the game and explore all the nuances of the story. And speaking of that, we've basically finished the beta in terms of the playthrough. So if you would like to, we can definitely continue chatting, but I wanted to point out that the beta is live on Steam. You can play this exact thing. We would really love your feedback. You can send it to us on our Steam forums, or we'd love for you to join our official Discord, which has been on the bottom of the stream here. We'd love to have you jump in there, give us your feedback, both on the game and anything we talked about on this stream.
For the future, so if folks who play through this beta, what can they expect from the early access release this fall and from the final game?
So early access, it will represent about, I think, so we played through a single era here. We're planning to have anywhere from 4 to 5 eras present in the sort of early access campaign. We're also we're also shooting for, I maybe I'm overcommitting, but we hope to have the extended campaign up until probably the big end game that we'd like to have. It'll be highly replayable. And our hope is through early access we'll continue to add more character classes, technologies, mission types, and so forth through our 1.0. So we definitely hope to spend quite a bit of time in early access, iterating with the players to kind of push the game to where we want it to be. And that'll be on Steam. And then our hope is to go out on 1.0 on PC alongside console versions, TBD specific platforms, whenever we exit early access, which we expect to be in 2021.
That is incredible. Yeah, early access. It's in fall. We've made this big ol' variety-filled, replayable afrofuturist world for you to play through as a uh, cosmically affected now wildlife conservation group in an exciting original sci-fi universe. We can't wait for you to join us on the Discord, on this beta, in the early access, and into the road to release. So thank you so much for watching. This has been Xalavier Nelson Jr., narrative lead on the game, Sherveen, designer on the game, and Scott Brodie, creative director. It's been a pleasure talking to you about it.